Tonight, 3 more murder charges for an Ontario doctor, his alleged victims, elderly hospital patients.
Brian Nadler was taken into custody and was before the courts for a bail hearing.
Dr. Brian Nadler already facing one similar charge. Also tonight, why airlines say they can't compensate you and what might change that.
You have to have enforcement, and you also have to have significant fines and penalties.
Plus the news you need to know for your passport application. And deadly destructive wildfires test Europe's capacity to fight them.
What worries me the most is our ability to respond.
This is The National. Good evening, I'm Adrienne. An Ontario town still grappling with shocking news has even more to take in tonight. More murder charges against a doctor already accused in the death of one patient. Dr. Brian Nadler was charged with first-degree murder more than a year ago. His alleged victim then, an elderly patient at the local hospital. Now, 3 more first-degree murder charges. Police say the investigation is ongoing. Matthew Kupfer starts us off tonight.
The latest alleged victims are 3 women, 79-year-old Lorraine Lalande, 80-year-old Claire Brière, and 93-year-old Judith Langulescu. A statement from Hawkesbury and District General Hospital confirms the patients were under Dr. Brian Nadler's care. The hospital says it's cooperating with police, and its immediate concern is providing appropriate care and support to the families of the deceased patients. The hospital is about an hour east of Ottawa and receives patients from both sides of the border with Quebec. Nadler was originally charged with murder in March of 2021. The alleged victim was an 89-year-old man. At the time, Ontario Provincial Police said they were investigating connections to other deaths at the hospital. A month later, CBC News learned that medications used to treat COVID-19 patients were part of the investigation. With respect to the new charges, police say Nadler was arrested at his home.
Any investigation like this can be very difficult. We have to work through a lot of details and make sure that we're thorough in collecting all information, so it can be very difficult.
In a statement, Nadler's lawyers say all 4 patients died of COVID-19 and Dr. Nadler provided excellent palliative care. When the facts are fully presented, we are confident that he will be vindicated. His lawyers also said in an email he was released on the same bail conditions from the original charge, which include a ban on practicing medicine, as well as from communicating with hospital staff, patients, or relatives treated at the Hawkesbury and District General Hospital. The Ontario Provincial Police say the investigation is ongoing. Matthew Kupfer, CBC News, Ottawa.
A small step taken today to address what's been a huge summer-long headache for some Canadians just itching to travel. New passport offices will try to ease the logjam of passport applications. But as JP Tasker explains, critics say the government should have been better prepared in the first place.
The massive lines that once snaked around outside this passport office have all but disappeared.
It was not frustrating at all, no, and I was pleasantly surprised. And if I could give, Google reviews, I would probably give 5 stars.
But that doesn't mean all the passport woes are over. To cope with scenes like this, the government has been triaging cases. People scheduled to travel within days get priority. Others can be left waiting, weeks or even months. People applying here today showed up hours before it opened, expecting the worst.
We'll see if I'm able to pick it up now and get it. I leave on Tuesday, so I'm just hoping for the best. But there are people lined up around the whole thing. It's crazy. It's kind of highly unnecessary.
We heard some people that said they were here since 4 o'clock in the morning. We showed up at 6:30. Yeah, we showed up 2 hours before, and I was in an hour and a half.
There are 35 passport offices across Canada, not nearly enough to service everyone who lives outside big cities. Today, a promise from the minister responsible.
We are expanding passport services to 4 additional Service Canada sites across the country.
She says there are more to come, but gave no details. Gould says passports will be available within 10 days at the new pickup locations, meaning more people facing immediate travel can get their documents in hand on time. But not soon enough, say critics.
it really undermines the trust in government. And
Andrew Griffith is a former top civil servant with Service Canada. He says the government has bungled the travel restart.
The surge was expected. It was in the departmental plan. Clearly there was some problem in terms of maybe they underestimated it, maybe they didn't take it serious enough, maybe they were busy doing other things.
So JP, we know it's bad, but how bad is bad in that passport pileup?
Well, the government has been overwhelmed with applications, Adrienne. More than 1 million have flooded in since April alone. And the government is saying they're doing everything they can to try and get a passport in the hands of travelers, but they're only pumping out 50,000 a week, and that's really not enough. There's hundreds of thousands of people now waiting to find out if they can leave the country anytime soon. Adrienne?
All right, JP Tasker in Ottawa. Thanks, JP. It's not just passport problems frustrating Canadian travelers. There's growing anger at airlines from passengers who say they're being unfairly denied compensation for delays and cancellations with improper reasons or just none at all. Sophia Harris now on the growing calls for Canada's transport regulator to get tougher.
This rejection doesn't ring true.
Shaquille Batty says he can't make sense of WestJet's letter denying him compensation for his 3-hour flight delay in June. Under federal rules, airlines only have to pay compensation up to $1,000 if the flight disruption is within the airline's control. In an email, WestJet told Batty the delay was outside of its control, but didn't say why. The airline also said the delay happened after departure.
The delay was pre-departure, and I have all the evidence to show it was pre-departure. So I don't understand what they're trying to tell me.
I definitely don't feel that they're following the rules.
Leslie Lowe asked for compensation after her flight last month was delayed by a full day. Air Canada rejected her claim without providing any explanation.
I think they don't have a valid reason, and I think that if they were to really be honest and transparent as to what happened, that they know that they'd be liable and they'd have to compensate the passengers on the flight.
The Canadian Transportation Agency says airlines must provide a comprehensive explanation when denying compensation.
If they don't, that could either be the subject of its own complaint or potentially enforcement action.
The CTA has yet to issue any fines involving compensation claims. Some consumer advocates say it's time for the transport regulator to get tough with non-compliant airlines.
I think the airlines are aware that they're not really being held accountable and they can get away with it. You have to have enforcement, and you also have to have significant fines and penalties to make the airlines act.
The CTA says unhappy passengers can file a complaint and that tough penalties for non-compliant airlines may be coming.
We are indeed looking at all the enforcement options.
So, Sophia, this is really interesting. I mean, obviously the passengers and the airlines will interpret things differently, but what are the airlines doing when passengers are saying, hey, we're being treated unfairly?
Well, both Air Canada and WestJet declined to comment on individual cases, but both airlines said they abide by the air passenger regulations. And Air Canada said that these rules are complex and open to interpretation, and that any, disagreements can be dealt with through the CTA complaints process. But the big problem here is that due to the travel chaos this summer, the CTA has been inundated with complaints. In fact, it has a backlog of more than 18,000 of them. So any passenger filing a complaint is going to have a wait ahead of them.
In for a long haul. Sophia, we know you're on it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Britain's inflation rate has hit a 40-year high. New figures show the cost of everyday goods rose more than 10% in the last 12 months, including spikes in food, gas, and household items. And the inflation rate is expected to rise even more, possibly to beyond 13% in October. Now, inflation in this country has a lot of people doing some serious price checking. Now, a once well-known discount store is making a comeback. Zellers will debut a new e-commerce website next year, and Nisha Patel got the reaction.
A decade after closing these doors, Hudson's Bay Company wants to revive the Zellers brand at a time when more shoppers are looking for discounts.
I love Zellers. I find their prices were good.
I would love to see it come back. I think it's great, to have discount stores, especially for those who, can't afford the higher prices.
The new Zellers will have a website for online shopping, and for now, no standalone stores. HBC will use space within some existing Hudson's Bay stores to sell housewares, toys, and clothing under the Zellers label.
Perhaps it's an exercise to bring in consumers into Hudson's Bay stores that may not otherwise go to the stores because they may think that they're too expensive.
The new plan also comes as HBC defends a trademark lawsuit against a Quebec family who started to use the Zellers name.
HBC opened 2 Zellers pop-ups inside Bay stores last year, testing whether consumers would welcome a Zellers comeback.
Much more. Many shoppers recall the Dollar Days, the points program, and a familiar jingle.
Zellers, where the lowest price is the law every day.
I remember there was a restaurant inside.
Hopefully the bear comes back too, I guess.
While the company seems to be banking on nostalgia to entice shoppers, analysts say how the launch is executed is key.
People did have fond memories of the branding, but they didn't necessarily have fond memories of the stores.
20 years ago, Zellers was at its peak with more than 350 locations, but business lagged amid competition from Walmart. HBC sold off its leases to Target and had closed most Zellers stores by 2013.
It's really low risk to them to do this. I just don't see it being a massive business like it used to be.
HBC hasn't said which Bay stores will host the Zellers brand first, just that there will be a presence across Canada, launching early next year. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Across the country, over-the-counter children's fever and pain medicine is in short supply. Some hospitals are recommending prescriptions to ensure patients get them, just in case. But as Chris Reyes explains, experts say, don't panic.
This is normally where we would keep our Tylenol suspensions.
At this Toronto pharmacy, Tylenol and Advil for kids are on back order. On Monday, the city's hospital for sick children said prescriptions for pain and flu medications might be necessary because of a nationwide shortage.
The shortage is not new. We have seen some rolling shortages since about the beginning of the year. So we did see a situation where the demand for these products did start to outstrip the production.
Health Canada says no prescription is needed for the over-the-counter drugs. Pharmacist Marcos Massey agrees, but says one may be needed for the generic version pharmacists can make on site.
In an emergency situation, something like Tylenol or acetaminophen can be prescribed as a suspension, which can be made by pharmacists behind the counter.
Ontario's health minister says the province is also monitoring the situation.
We are obviously monitoring very closely to make sure that there aren't shortages that are going to impact in a wider way across Ontario.
At this pharmacy, cold and flu medications for adults are still available, and some doctors say that's an option.
If your child is a bit older, there are also ones you can crush that would be chewable medication or even medication used for adults, depending on the weight and the size of your child.
Tylenol suspension is not a super difficult medication to manufacture.
Massey's prediction that he'll be able to order the kids' medication in a couple of months. Until then, his advice to parents, stop stockpiling them. Chris Reyes, CBC News, Toronto.
To relieve the pressure for hospital emergency rooms, Ontario is expanding a program that gives paramedics more flexibility about where they take patients.
I look forward to exploring more ways we can work together to further support community paramedicine and other innovations that will reduce 911 emergency calls and emergency department visits.
The pilot project, which began in 2020, allows paramedics to take patients somewhere other than an emergency room, like a mental health facility. It also allows them to treat patients on the scene for certain conditions. A nursing staff shortage has forced the temporary closure of some ERs across the province. Now, these days, those staffing issues can mean that even in an emergency, there's no guarantee an ambulance will arrive in a timely manner to take you to hospital. Paramedics are under strain to deliver life-saving services, in some cases leading to a situation known as level 0.
That was medic 4 and 5, 6.
We just expect it to happen. You call 911, an ambulance is on the way immediately to take you to hospital. It's a system that works until it suddenly doesn't.
At this point right now, we don't have any ambulances available for that next call.
That almost all red screen in Ottawa's emergency dispatch room is bad news. Level 0. For all of Ottawa?
For 2,800 square kilometers.
Ambulances not there in part because they're busy or piling up at hospitals under so much pressure that some are forced to close the ERs.
At some point in time, something's got to give.
An exclusive look at the toll it takes to try to save lives now, the stress and the solutions. Tomorrow on The National. The World Health Organization says monkeypox is spreading rapidly with no signs of slowing down. There are 35,000 cases in 92 countries. Over 7,000 cases were reported just last week. That is up 20% from the previous week. Canada has just over 1,000 confirmed cases right now. But spreading right alongside is misinformation about how the virus moves. Lauren Pelly now with what you need to know about monkeypox transmission.
Swipe through TikTok or other apps.
There was a person with monkeypox at the thrift store I went to. Like, I'm done. I'm out.
And you'll find plenty of questions and concerns about monkeypox. Not all of it is accurate.
I hope that all those people who are really afraid of getting monkeypox are also advocating for services and support services for people who do get monkeypox.
Len Tooley was one of the first people in Toronto to catch this virus. A health policy researcher and advocate for queer health, he says it's clear how it's spreading and who it's impacting most.
It's mostly affecting, very specific population. It's mostly sexually transmitted. And so if you're not in that that group of folks, then you probably don't have too much to worry about.
In both Canada and the U.S., 99% of cases to date have been male, with transmission mainly reported among men who have sex with men.
Whether or not it's the skin-to-skin contact with sex or it's through genital fluids, which there's now some evidence around viral load in semen, is not totally clear.
This week, the European Centre for Disease Control said the likelihood of this virus spreading beyond sexual networks into the broader population is considered low. Even so, social media videos suggest you might be able to catch monkeypox from toilet seats or on the subway. Scientists say transmission is possible by handling someone's contaminated bedding or clothes, but
it's completely overblown that we should be concerned about, touching an inanimate object like a doorknob going into a place or a scooter or, washing every item that we get from the grocery store.
It also doesn't seem easy to catch monkeypox in public spaces.
I mean, if it was more effectively transmitted through the air, we would have had a much larger outbreak a long time ago.
What is clear is this virus definitely spreads through close contact. That can mean sex or even just living in the same household as someone who's infected. In those cases, medical experts suggest wearing a mask, cleaning surfaces, and washing any contaminated bedding or clothing. Lauren Pelly, CBC News, Toronto.
We're getting a new sense tonight of just how diverse Canada's linguistic landscape has become, thanks to new census data from Statistics Canada. So it shows a record high. 1 in 4 Canadians reports having a first language other than English or French, and that a record 13% of people, almost 1 in 8, predominantly speak a language other than those two at home, the most common being Mandarin and Punjabi. Now, English and French are still the most widely spoken languages in this country, but as Alison Northcott shows us, a smaller share of Quebecers are using mainly French.
Des pièces de métal.
In this Montreal classroom, immigrants to Quebec are working on their French. Mariana Fonseca from Brazil speaks Portuguese at home and also speaks English.
I'm really eager to learn the French language, actually. And I think if you are in Quebec, and their culture, their history, all is connected with the French language.
As in the rest of Canada, a growing number of Quebecers reported their first language is neither English nor French, and the proportion that speaks predominantly French at home has declined from 79% in 2016 to 77.5% in 2021.
Most immigrants who land in Canada
usually have a mother tongue that is not French nor English. So they're increasing at a faster pace than the rest of the population.
Quebec's French language minister says it shows the need for the government's controversial French language law that caps enrollment at English colleges and imposes new rules for small businesses.
We have Bill 96 that will change the face of French and that will stop decline.
Some Montrealers say they're worried about the state of French in the province. This woman says she's starting to see it disappear, but others see things differently.
I think it's important that people speak multiple languages. You never know where you're going to need it.
While outside Quebec, the proportion of people who are French-English bilingual has dropped. In Quebec, it's grown.
C'est quoi en anglais? Serpent d'eau? Water snake?
This family has one francophone and one anglophone parent and a completely bilingual 8-year-old.
It's mostly French for me. We go back and forth. We go English, French.
I do see more and more people switching back and forth between languages. I see a lot of what happens in our house, in fact, happening outside. So I don't feel that we're alone in this.
Canada's official languages minister says the federal government recognizes French is on the decline in Canada and says it's working on an action plan to reverse that. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
The number of people speaking Indigenous languages is also shifting. The StatsCan data showed an overall decrease in those who reported being able to converse in an Indigenous language, but there was also an increase among the youngest of speakers, those 8 years old and younger. Statistics Canada says COVID and wildfire evacuations prevented it from gathering some data, so it has adjusted these numbers just a bit. Train passengers in Spain forced to run for safety as forest fires engulf the cabins. Up next, Europe's long battle with wildfires, why there is no end in sight. New research shows big cars are more deadly.
I was hit on my bike in 2015 by a woman driving a large SUV, nearly 5,000 pounds.
Now advocates are asking for more regulations. And wolves escape a BC zoo, but did someone help them? We're back in 2.
The National, voted Canada's best national newscast.
That is a violent hailstorm lashing through the doors of a hospital in southern France. The country is being hit with more extreme weather this week after some unrelenting drought. In Paris, this mess. Several metro stations flooded with water just gushing down the stairs. Look at that. Much of Europe, however, is still baking in hot and dry weather, fueling an unprecedented fire season. In Spain, flames are forcing entire communities to flee. Katie Nicholson now with the latest from a continent on fire.
There to beat back the flames, Spanish firefighters forced into frantic retreat. Terrifying moments, too, for passengers on a train, forced to brake as fire crept along the tracks. Some panicked and ran. Several people seriously burned. The train, no choice but to reverse back to the station. These latest wildfires in Spain's Valencia region, sparked by lightning in the wee hours of Monday morning, prompted evacuations of entire villages. It's our town, says this evacuee, the land of our grandparents, where we have always been. And the truth is that it is a disaster. Europe has been ravaged by fires all summer. Smoke from Portugal now choking Madrid. Countries within the European Union are helping each other through, sharing aircraft and on-the-ground support, from France to Portugal to Slovenia. Fire season typically runs to October in Europe. They are only halfway through, and already the EU's firefighting fleet has been activated more times this year than it was last year.
In 2017, which was one of the worst years on record, the most devastating figures came in October. So we know that there will be some difficult weeks ahead of us.
Drought has left much of Western Europe tinder dry, and there's no end in sight.
What worries me the most is our ability to respond, especially when there are a number of requests competing with each other. We don't want to be in a situation whereby we have to tell a member state that we are not able to mobilize help rapidly.
But for now, they're holding their own, if not always managing to hold the line. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, London.
An Ontario man dreamed of becoming a Mountie, but his dream quickly turned into a nightmare.
They came through the door with their, I don't know, whatever equipment they had. They smashed this completely.
Up next, how a man's love for the RCMP got him in trouble, but was the police response warranted? And a suspicious incident at a BC zoo after wolves make a break for it. Stay with us. An Ontario man says he is still living through a legal nightmare after police crashed through his door 2 years ago, dragged him out, and put him behind bars. Jonathan Gatehouse explains how a collection of RCMP memorabilia and some online photos sparked it all.
They came through the door with their, I don't know, whatever equipment they had. They smashed this completely.
It was 6:30 a.m. when close to a dozen Kingston police tactical officers stormed Warren Twing's home in a high-risk no-knock raid usually used against suspected drug dealers. But they were acting on a tip about Twing's Mountie memorabilia, including old uniforms.
It would have been a lifetime career.
Twing dreamed of becoming a Mountie, but didn't meet height requirements, so he became a superfan instead. His collection wasn't a problem until the April 2020 massacre in Nova Scotia. In the aftermath, RCMP investigators found Facebook photos of Twing modeling his gear. They told Kingston police, who charged Twing with impersonating a peace officer.
I was handcuffed, taken out to a minivan, put in the back. I was put into a cell and left there.
Subjected to COVID quarantine, Twing spent 14 days in custody. A year later, the charge was withdrawn, and his collection, minus the uniforms, was returned.
If the Kingston police detective had called me, there would have been no need to have called in SWAT, in my case, because I would have gone down to the police station, gladly.
Kingston police declined to answer questions about the raid, but search warrant documents confirmed Twing had never before faced arrest. Safety concerns seem limited to his licensed handgun, an antique that hasn't been fired in decades.
It's excessive.
This Toronto defense lawyer says police use of no-knock raids is growing, but she can't understand why Twing was targeted.
Your home is your castle. It needs to be protected. And so there has to be a way for us to strike this, hopefully perfect balance between ensuring the officer's safety and ensuring that we get it right when it comes to people's homes.
Twing is still in court fighting a police effort to take away his handgun, based in part on the dropped impersonation charge. Nova Scotia RCMP tells CBC News there never was any link between Twing and the Portapic killer. He was simply someone they stumbled upon on Facebook. A man whose passion for policing briefly put him on the wrong side of the law. Jonathan Gatehouse, CBC News, Toronto.
There are growing concerns about your safety on sidewalks and streets. A pedestrian hit by an SUV is much more likely to die than one hit by a regular car. And Stats Can says sales of larger vehicles have more than doubled since 2010. Tyler Chi spoke with people in Ontario, urgently calling for change.
There are more SUVs and pickup trucks on the road than there were 10 years ago. Now, street safety advocates are speaking out about the damage they can do.
I was hit on my bike in 2015 by a woman driving a large SUV, nearly 5,000 pounds. She claimed that she didn't see me.
Jessica Speaker suffered a broken spine, a brain injury, and extensive soft tissue damage.
I live with chronic pain. I live with debilitating depression and anxiety. I'm never going to be the same person that I was before this happened.
16 Ontario advocacy groups have come together to ask the chief coroner to look into street deaths caused by these kinds of vehicles.
So really what we're asking the coroner to do is not only to save lives, but to spare families the anguish that comes with losing a loved one.
The groups say recent research out of the U.S. shows these vehicles are especially deadly due to flaws built into their design.
The fact that they are higher means that drivers have blind spots that prevent them from seeing pedestrians or cyclists. And also their front ends are very high and they hit people on the thorax, so on their vital organs.
This is demonstrated in a CBC original series on GEM called Stories About Here, where documentary filmmaker Yu-Tae Lee explores the subject.
A sedan is more likely to clip a pedestrian's legs and send them flying on top of its hood, which is designed to be bouncy like a metal trampoline. Still very painful, but not as fatal.
In a letter to the chief coroner, the advocacy groups outline data from Toronto Police. They say the numbers are consistent with the U.S. research, and the chief coroner has addressed similar issues before.
It's like the safety of people outside of cars has been completely forgotten by our safety regulators, and that needs to change.
Tyler Cheese, CBC News, Toronto.
In BC, the Greater Vancouver Zoo remains closed as the search for at least one escaped wolf continues. The zoo has been closed since Tuesday after a number of wolves escaped their enclosure. Police say it appears someone cut the fence and freed the wolves on purpose. Now, most have been recaptured, but BC conservation officers say there's still at least one wolf out there. The zoo is about an hour east of the city proper, just north of the small community of Aldergrove in Langley, where locals are keeping a wary eye out. The facility has been in the news in the past. A harsh 2019 Vancouver Humane Society report said its large animals didn't have enough room. That same year, a young girl was airlifted to hospital after she was bitten by a black bear. And last December, a zoo worker was seriously injured while feeding a jaguar. We're not done with zoo animals just yet. A little later on the show, a cheeky monkey.
It must have been Root.
Root the monkey, that is, how it managed to call 911. But first,
we found the solution after cod. What's the solution after oil?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
we explore Newfoundland's next economic pivot. Stay with us. Welcome back. For the second time in a generation, Newfoundland and Labrador is shifting away from a lifeblood industry. 3 decades ago, it was the northern cod fishery. Now, as the battle against climate change ramps up, It's offshore oil. Earlier this summer, David Cochran took us back to his home province to see what this means for people there now and in the years ahead.
Daybreak at the edge of Canada. An early start at the D.F. Barnes fabrication shop in St. John's, where for 12 years, Sharon Whalen has been welding, mostly for offshore oil.
I think it was a good career path that I chosen. There's great stability in the life. It's home every night. You get it's good money.
She's from nearby Bell Island, where jobs are scarce. Oil gave her a chance to work close to home.
A lot of people I went to high school with, they did move out west, but for the most part, if they're not working in trades, they're maybe not working.
The people here will keep working thanks to the approval of the Bay du Nord project, a 200 million barrel oil field in the deep waters northeast of here. Ottawa approved it despite pressure from environmentalists. Some fear it could be the last oil project and that history is about to repeat itself. Growing up here in the 1980s, cod was king, but by 1992 the northern cod fishery had closed forever. The king was dead, and the population of this province dropped by 10% over the next decade. Offshore oil put a floor under the population and the economy, but now that floor is starting to creak. The thought of a similar transition is enough to drive you to drink. So I sat down with Premier Andrew Furey to talk about it over a pint.
The cod moratorium is directly responsible for the demographic shift in our communities today. So in the 70s, we had 6 kids for every senior. Now we have 2 seniors for every kid. That's just not sustainable.
But how do you avoid a repeat of that with this transition?
Well, I think we have the benefit, if you will, of having the bad experience from the cod moratorium to have lessons learned moving into this transition.
Is Bay du Nord the last project, though?
No, I don't think so. I think Bay du Nord is the new gold standard.
But you're liberal, right? And the Liberal government claims to be a climate champion, and you saw the hit they took. Yep. I mean, do you think you'd be able to get another one through, Stephen Guilbeault, if he stays Environment Minister?
It's responsible to be the new gold standard, and we should promote it as such. But I think that's why Newfoundland and Labrador's offshore is well positioned, because there is more out there that is similar. Will it have to meet the rigorous environmental process? Absolutely, and it should.
Right, so like in 92, it was like a light switch went off, right? And the room just went dark. And this is more of a dimmer switch transition that, the oil sector here will...
Yeah, I don't see it as a dimmer, I see it as a changing one light to another.
That light is in the process of being changed about 100 kilometers away at the Come By Chance oil refinery. This place closed in 2020. But its new owner, Berea, is trying to give it new life. So how has the mood changed with your members, knowing that there's a second chance for this place?
The mood changed quite a bit because they had no future.
Union President Glenn Nolan has been working with the company to build a new future, one built around biofuels.
It's brought life back into the workers. There's an opportunity now for expansions. Berea has talked to us about it, and they got plans, and hopefully we'll get a second phase, a third phase, and keep going, because renewable is the future, and we're going to be the first of its kind to get on track with this. So it's a good news story in that sense.
So this place didn't just refine oil, it refined Russian oil.
Absolutely, it was different types of oil. It was sour crude, it was light crude. So it was different types of crude that they can get on the market, local crude, whatever they get at a good price, and we'd refine it.
Once this conversion is complete, crude oil will be replaced with corn oil, cooking oil, and soybean oil to make renewable diesel and lower emission aviation fuel. It will be cleaner but smaller, only about half the jobs they had in the past.
It won't be the same numbers, and that's the hard part. There will people that will not receive a job at first, but there is possibilities.
The transition is less obvious in St. John's, where the signs of economic strain are easy to find, thanks to 2 years of COVID and a slowdown in the oil sector. The hope is Bay du Nord provides another jolt, so the big supply ships can keep making their runs offshore and the last barrel of oil is a barrel of Newfoundland and Labrador oil. Back at the shop, company president Jason Fudge is preparing for life after that last barrel.
60 to 70% of the work we do in this shop right now is oil and gas.
The story of D.F. Burns is the story of the provincial economy, originally focusing on engines and parts for ships, then offshore oil, now looking internationally and close to home for what's next.
Obviously, we're going through an energy evolution, and we recognize and support that. Newfoundland and Labrador relies a lot on its oil and gas industry. I mean, it can't be overstated how important it is for us.
We found the solution after cod. What's the solution after oil?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Do we know what that next industry is going to be beyond oil and gas? I'm not sure what that is yet, but we'll find an answer to that. And I don't think that needs to be today, next week, next year, or a decade from now.
It's the million-dollar question for the 500,000 people who live here. From an abrupt transition 30 years ago to a more gradual one, nearly 30 years from now. David Cochran, CBC News, St. John's.
After the break, a Canada Games athlete becomes Nunavut's hero.
Wrestling saved my life. Best I could say is it saved me from a life behind bars or even worse.
The emotional homecoming after a gold medal win, and a couple of paddlers stumble on a massive surprise.
I'm Jamie Poisson, and tomorrow on CBC's daily news podcast, Front Burner, after an attack on writer Salman Rushdie's life. A look back on the satanic verses, the fatwa that followed, and the impacts at the time still being felt today. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Up close and pretty personal with some giants of the sea. This is off the south coast of Argentina. 2 paddleboarders out for a cruise got to know some whales, 12 of them, which hung around for about an hour. The paddleboarders said they never felt fear, only immense joy. Speaking of joy, now we will show you a hero's welcome for a young Inuit athlete who's made history. He's the first competitor from Nunavut to win a gold medal at the Canada Games. He told Juanita Taylor how the older brother he lost to tragedy was a big part of his big win.
With his gold medal around his neck, Ikiluak Avalak is greeted first by his father, one of hundreds of people filling the Cambridge Bay Airport.
Oh, we're all so excited, just bubbling behind my head. I'm so glad that everybody's here to support the whole team.
Then a hero's parade around the western Nunavut community where about 2,000 people live. The celebrations continued into the evening, including videos featuring the athletes and a recap of that gold medal match. The 18-year-old says being Nunavut's first ever gold medalist still feels like a dream.
It's definitely a lifetime memory that I'll always hold.
And he credits this man, his coach, who says Avalak's win was the most emotional he's ever been.
It's not only for him, but it's for all Inuit, it's for all of Nunavut, because it shows that, you can come from a small Indigenous community, Inuit community, and you can reach the top of the stage.
But there's another person special to Avalak who he says helped him win gold. His late brother Joannesy, who took his own life in 2015.
He was my big brother, yes. Just thinking that he was there. I didn't see him there, but I felt his presence there, and that gave me a big confidence booster in my gold medal match.
An emotional Avalak mentioned his brother in his victory speech right after his win, a heartfelt moment for their father.
And I'm so happy, I'm so proud of him. My family and my siblings, we all had, we all had tears about it, but those tears, for me, it's part of healing.
Wrestling itself was part of Avalak's healing.
Wrestling saved my life. It didn't just change me. I was just around a misguided crowd. Best I could say is it saved me from a life behind bars or even worse.
Now he's focused on his next goal.
The goal to the Olympics.
That's something people in Cambridge Bay say they can see in 2024. Ikiluak Avalak competing at the Summer Olympics in Paris. Juanita Taylor, CBC News, Cambridge Bay, Nunavut.
We can all see that. Up next, when monkeying around goes to a whole new level.
And nobody can figure out, well, no, it wasn't us. We didn't call.
The curious case of a monkey calling the cops in our moment. Next. Well, that's a pretty scene, but it also happens to be the scene of a curious mystery for a California sheriff's office. So here's what happened. A brief 911 call had been placed, but then quickly disconnected. The dispatchers tried calling and texting back, but no luck. Then the call was traced to a zoo, that place you just saw, and the unmasking of the caller is our moment.
And nobody could figure out, well, no, it wasn't us. We didn't call.
Interesting. And indeed, it wasn't employees at the zoo who called, but they pretty quickly had a cheeky suspect in mind.
And then at the same time, they all said, it must have been Root.
Root is a tiny, rambunctious capuchin monkey. Sometimes they get called organ grinder monkeys. You might see them in movies and TV shows, and they have skills. They're curious, pretty handy with tools and phones, apparently, and just cute enough that no one was mad.
I love it because it's, you know, it's just good, fun news, and everybody needs a little bit of that. So I'm happy that Root is able to put a little joy in everybody's lives.
Cute, but they're probably going to lock up their phones and wallets with this one around. So why did Root call the police? We won't know. How? Well, Root, it seems, nicked a cell phone that was in a golf cart. This place, Zoo to You, is a rescue facility. They say the bulk of their calls are from people who purchase monkeys as pets and then instantly regret it. That is a national for August the 17th. Good night.